Father God, I just ask that you would be with us at this time. Lord, I pray that your truth and your truth alone would be spoken. That at this time you would open up our hearts, our minds, our ears, our eyes, and our souls to receive your truth. I ask that you would allow us to clearly understand what you have prepared for us today. And Lord, would you continue to remind us daily of the good news that is your gospel. Lord, we thank you so much. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay. All right. So today, I want to begin by going over a movie scene, or I guess a movie plot with you guys. And so, yes, some of you guys, I hope most of us recognize these two characters. And so if you don't know, if you're not familiar, on the left is Captain America, and on the right is Bucky Barnes. No, it's not Jesus. It's Bucky Barnes, although I guess he has long hair, so anyways. But it's Bucky Barnes, Winter Soldier. And so the movie that these two are very tied together in is Civil War. And so if you know anything about Captain America, he's a guy who's famous for not only sticking to his ideals, but standing up for his principles that he believes despite what everyone else may think. And so the movie Civil War, the scenario is Bucky Barnes, his old-time friend turned into super soldier, is now claimed to be a terrorist. And so everyone in the world sees Captain America's friends as a terrorist, as a bad guy. But Captain America, being the guy who sticks to his ideals, who sticks to his beliefs, knows deep down inside, because he has a relationship with Bucky Barnes, that Bucky Barnes is not a terrorist, that he's a good guy. And so Captain America resists the external pressures of the world saying that no, Bucky Barnes is a terrorist, and actually has faith in his friend, that he's not a terrorist. And so what does he do? He basically fights everyone to defend his friend Bucky Barnes, including Iron Man himself. And so likewise today, we're going to be learning about three friends who battle between external pressures and their internal principles, what they believe, their faith, their relationship with God, and ultimately decide to either stand up for God or to succumb to the worldly pressures. And so today we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. If you would open up your Bibles to Daniel chapter 3, we're going to be starting from verse 1. So Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Just wait a few more seconds as I still hear pages turning. Just a small side thought that came into my mind. Isn't it pleasant hearing like pages turning, like hearing that? Anyways. All right, so Daniel chapter 3, starting from verse 1. Here we go. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. And he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace." And so the chapter begins with Nebuchadnezzar establishing a very large golden image for everyone in the entire nation to worship and to bow down to. Nebuchadnezzar, in his greed, decides that the plethora of gods that the Babylonians had is not enough. And so what does he do? He creates another one. And ultimately, we come to realize that the golden image that he sets up for everyone to bow down and worship is actually Nebuchadnezzar himself. And I think it's interesting how Nebuchadnezzar actually parallels kind of our relationship with God too. In Nebuchadnezzar's greed to be recognized as God, he even sets up a musical band to play during the worship of him, kind of like how we have our praise team when we worship God. And as if it wasn't already a big deal, he gathers every single official, all of them, and he makes sure that everyone knows that everyone is to bow down to this golden image whenever the music is set, whenever the music is played. And everyone who refuses will be then thrown into his fiery furnace. It's almost as if Nebuchadnezzar considers himself as a god, like the Israelite God, demands to be worshipped like the Israelite God, and if people don't worship him, that he's going to throw them into his personal hell, which is his fiery furnace. Let's continue on in verse 12. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" And so in the beginning, we see that all the officials are greedy, but also very envious of the three friends. So much so that they devise a plan to trap them with the only thing that they can hold them against, which is their strict obedience to the Israelite God and not Nebuchadnezzar. But it's also interesting how Nebuchadnezzar responds too. First, Nebuchadnezzar responds in anger as the friends are contesting his worship. They're contesting him being recognized as a god. But at the same time, Nebuchadnezzar is also somewhat logical. And so he recognizes that the friends are one of his most capable men. And so he can't just simply sacrifice them and throw them into the furnace. And so he tries his best to give them a chance, or at least that's what he thinks. And so he gives them a chance to save their own lives by bowing down right there at that moment and worshiping the golden image. And so now, the three friends are now in a situation in which they have to decide. Do they bow down to this golden image, to Nebuchadnezzar, and recognize him as a god? Or do they stand firm in their obedience and faithfulness to God? So, do they resist the external pressures of needing to worship Nebuchadnezzar and the golden image to save their lives? Or do they stick to the internal principle, which is their faith and their relationship with God, to hold God's law above their own lives? Do they slowly start to fall into Babylonian culture? Or do they stand righteous and faithful? Let's see how they respond in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." What? Wow. Nebuchadnezzar is already angry, but he gives the friends a chance to explain themselves and possibly save their lives. But they respond by denying to even respond at all? Do they not realize the situation that they're in? Are they trying to die? Are they trying to just end their lives? Shouldn't they want to live to ensure Israelites' future? It's kind of like when you anger your older brother or sister and they say, "No 맞을래?" You don't go up to them and say, "Oh, 때려봐." Because what's going to happen? You're going to get hit. But rather, if you don't want them to hit you, what do you say? "Oh, no, I'm sorry. I won't bother you. I won't bother you." So, for the friends, they completely just deny even answering Nebuchadnezzar. But that's not it. Let's look at verse 17. "If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Wow. That's some boldness that they have, right? So not only do they have nothing to say to even answer Nebuchadnezzar, but they go a step further and they address the root of Nebuchadnezzar's anger, which is being recognized and worshipped as a god. They tell him not only is the God that they believe in above him, but that ultimately, even if the God that they believe in doesn't save them, that they will still choose to believe in their God. So ultimately, they're saying to his face, "Look, Nebuchadnezzar, there's nothing you can do to change our obedience to God. You have no power over us. You as a God are not powerful, but rather our God is powerful over you." Dang. But you have to wonder, you have to kind of think, what allows them to be so bold? For us, if we're honest, we even have a hard time bringing up spiritual things and having conversations about God and what happens after our lives to our friends. Nonetheless, the Christian God and the gospel. We're often so embarrassed by Christianity and its virtues that we can't even tell our friends, "Hey, look, I'm praying for you in your broken time," out of encouragement. We even have a hard time just saying even that. And so for the friends, what's the source of their boldness? What allows them to be so bold? The truth is, the three friends had a strong faith in God. They knew God's character, and we see that in verse 17 and 18. They knew that God was above Nebuchadnezzar, and because of their relationship with God, they also understand that God sides with the righteous. That's why they were able to be so bold against Nebuchadnezzar. Their confidence comes from their faith in God. But even better, God honors their faithfulness with favor and blessings. We saw that in chapter 1 with Pastor Kevin several weeks ago. And in turn, that continues to fuel their faith, continues to fuel their confidence, which then allows them to be bold against Nebuchadnezzar, even in the face of death. Now, this isn't to say that you being bold about your faith means you say dumb things to get you in trouble or hurt or killed. What the friends are saying is that Nebuchadnezzar isn't their God, nonetheless a God, but rather that their God is the one and only true God. They're being bold for what is right and true. So let me give you kind of a personal example of this. And so there was a time when I was attending community college right up here at COC, and I was taking a music production class. And so in that class, there was a group project that was assigned, and it was somewhat of a simple project. So what we had to do is we had to produce our own song, and we had the freedom to do any genre, any style. The only thing is that we had to personally produce it and personally record it, and it had to be longer than 2 minutes. So the assignment's not too difficult. But within the grouping that our professor had assigned, there was this one student that seemed as if he wouldn't do much work. He seemed as if he would just kind of try to slide by with our group, put in very minimal effort, if at all, and try to receive the grade that we all would work for. And so the rest of my group mates considered this thought: should we just leave him out and work on this by ourselves? Should we just do it, the 3 of us, so that we could get a good grade? Because, I mean, if we risk including him into our group, and if he doesn't do the work, then we're going to suffer with a bad grade, or else we're not going to receive a good grade, if even that. And for me, if I'm honest with you, it was tempting, because the logical thing was, yeah, it looks like he's not going to do the work. And if he doesn't do the work, that means our project isn't going to be complete. And if our project isn't complete, then we can only receive so much of a good grade, right? And so I was tempted. But deep down inside, I knew, like, that doesn't sit right with me. The idea that I'm going to abandon, potentially leave this other student behind just so that I can get a better grade, or possibly get a better grade, didn't sit right for me. And so I asked my group to reconsider. I asked them, hey man, what if we just give him a chance? Who knows? Who knows what'll happen? And so it would be great if I told you there was a dramatic turn of events. He's actually like a prodigy, like he's a genius, he's a hard worker, and so he does like most of the work, and we get the best grade out of the class and things like that. But yeah, it wasn't the case. The reality actually was, though, that he actually did his work. He actually did put in the time. He actually did do his work. Now, granted, we didn't get an A, but we actually ended up getting a B, which is still, I think, a good grade. And so I think in that moment, God honored my stand to stand up for what's right, to stand up for the friend rather than leaving him behind. And so he allowed us to graciously get a B. Because the other side could have been that, what if the professor actually does find out that we excluded him? Then he could have either docked our grade to be an even worse grade than what it would have been, or who knows, maybe he would have failed all of us altogether. And so I think in that moment that God actually honored my decision to stand up for what's right, to stand up to what God has said and his law. Likewise, for the friends, they're able to boldly overcome the external pressure of saving their own lives of death because of their internal pressure. Their faith in God was that much more stronger and secure. They were grounded in God's truth and had a relationship with him to know his character and nature. And they knew that God stands with the righteous, and so they can be reassured. And so for the friends, death was outweighed by their relationship with God. Now, let's look back at Daniel to see what happens to the friends. Let's look at verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the burning fiery furnace. And so now the friends are really facing imminent death. They're not only about to be thrown into the furnace, but it's now 7 times hotter. So hot that the guards that bound them, the guards that took them up to the furnace, got burnt and died themselves. Now, if anyone was to beg for their life, I think it would be this exact moment. They witnessed firsthand, like in front of their eyes, the very guards burn up and die. And so you think, when you see that happening in front of your face, your heart would begin to waver. Like your heart would cause you to reconsider, maybe I should save my life. Maybe I should beg now. Maybe I should bow down now so that I can live. Because death is about to happen to me. It's kind of like when you see like scary roller coasters like all across the world, right? And you think like at your house, in your room, on your bed, like as you're watching, like, oh, that's an easy ride. I could totally ride that. But when you actually go up to the roller coaster, you're about to sit down and you're like, I don't know if I can handle this anymore. Like your heart begins to change. When you're in the comfort of your own home, you're like, no, dude, that's totally easy. Like I do Goliath, I do Tatsu, is X2 still around? X2, easy. And then when you actually get into the seat, you're like, I don't know if I can handle this anymore. Like you almost want to get off. And so you would think that when they're faced with this predicament in their face, when it's reality, you would begin to waver. But as we just read, that actually wasn't the case. Nothing is mentioned about them wavering. Nothing is mentioned about them begging for their life. Meaning, when they responded to Nebuchadnezzar a few moments earlier, they were serious about what they said. They were ready to die in obedience to God. They understood that God not only has the ability to save them, but even if God were not to save them, that they would still be obedient to God because they understood that their God was a real king, not Nebuchadnezzar. For the friends, their relationship with God far outweighed the cost of death, cost of their lives, and they believed and had relationship with the real king of the universe, which allowed them to be so bold, especially when death is right in front of them. But it doesn't end here. Again, God sides with the righteous and shows grace to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Let's read verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. I'd like to think that the 4th person is actually God being present with them. That in the midst of them falling into the fiery furnace, God catches them before they even hit the ground. And so that's why Nebuchadnezzar is perplexed and he notices. When we take a look back at verse 24 and 25, we see that the friends who were bound up, who were tied up, and who were thrown into the fire are actually found unbound, unharmed, and free, walking inside the furnace. They're chilling inside with God. They're like walking around, just having a good time. And I believe that that's how God responds to our faithfulness. When we are steadfast and we resist the external pressures to compromise our faith, He saves us. When we're faced with situations in which we have to costly stand up for God, I believe that God isn't just staying distant, but rather He intervenes and shows us grace and saves us. In Hebrews 13, it says, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." And I believe that that's what God did for the friends here. That He didn't just let them to suffer and die into the fire, but rather He chose to intervene, to save them, and allow them to live freely. And so, for when your friends offer you test answers for this upcoming big test that you desperately need a good grade on, and you say, thanks, but no thanks. When you stand up for a friend that either is being bullied or is being wrongly accused, even knowing that at the end of you defending them, you'll be socially outcast, you'll be marked as that one guy. When you decide to resist the external pressures and believe in your internal principle, your faith, your relationship with God, that's when God saves us in those very moments, like when he sent Jesus to die on the cross. But I want us to look at one more thing here. Why did God allow this entire ordeal of the friends and the furnace and of Nebuchadnezzar? Why do you think it happened? Or why do you think God allowed these things to happen? I think it's because he's also trying to reach Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember from the beginning of the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar builds a golden image to be worshipped so that he ultimately can be worshipped. But God, through the friends, contests his worship and contests him being recognized as a god. Matter of fact, Nebuchadnezzar is now hit with the reality that he's not a God all-powerful, but that the Israelite God is superior, that the Israelite God is above him. That's why we see in verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar addresses the friends as servants of the Most High God. Because of the external pressure of reality, Nebuchadnezzar is now faced to change his internal principle that he is a God, that he's all-powerful. But now that there is an Israelite God that he has to address and hear by. But now, I don't think Nebuchadnezzar is saved right there in that moment. I think that if we look at verse 26, he doesn't address the Israelite God as his own God. He doesn't address the Israelite God as my high God, but rather that it's just a superior God that happens to exist. But I do believe that there's something happening here. It's interesting that in verse 25 that Nebuchadnezzar has the discernment to recognize that this fourth being, this fourth figure, is not just a regular person, but is the superior being, something else, something different. And he recognizes it as son of the gods. I think that's the beginning of the change in Nebuchadnezzar. And so the story completes like this in verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks against anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So God grants the three friends opportunities to be bold in their faith, not only to bolster their own faith and their relationship with God, but also to reveal his glory to others. I think it's interesting to note that in verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar is the first to recognize this fourth figure. God in his sovereignty and love utilizes these opportunities when we stand up costly for the cross, not only to grow us in our character and our relationship with him, but also to reveal his glory. Through our faithfulness, God is revealed to be something worth fighting for, something worth sacrificing things for. And people take note of that. I really think they do. I really think that people see that. And so God uses our faithfulness to reveal his glory. So I just want to end by encouraging you with this. Those of you that are standing up for Christ by sacrificing something, would you know that what you're doing is not pointless, but rather that God recognizes it and he will use it and he will work through you and your situation? Not only that, but God will honor your faithfulness and will help you through the Holy Spirit as he sent Christ to die on the cross for us and to save us. And for those of us that are still wrestling with the external pressures and our relationship with God, would you seek God for help? Would you seek him to help you through, to resist the external pressures, to have a deeper relationship with him, to know better his character and his nature? And lastly, for those of us that had various moments where we couldn't resist, where we gave in, where we fell short, would you seek God even more? Would you seek God as an act of forgiveness rather than being expectant of punishment? Because Christ already paid that punishment that we are due. Christ already paid for our sins, past, present, and future. And so for us, we only need to seek God. We only need to seek Christ and choose him. So for those of you that think that it's too late, it's not. I think that if you think that you've sinned too much to approach God, I think that's the best time to approach God. I think it's in that moment that Jesus really wants to accept and receive you and forgive you. And so for those of you, if you feel like I'm too dirty to approach God, there's no way that God would embrace me, I think actually that Jesus has been waiting for you for so long that you should, in that moment, you should choose Christ. Let's pray.